Playing politics with pogey, I'm Lilley with TheRebel.Media. It's a dangerous game for politicians to play with pogey, the employment insurance system, that is. That's if you want to win seats in certain parts of the country. You might remember that Chretien and his Liberals, they famously tinkered with the system in the 90s, and then they were virtually wiped out in Atlantic Canada in the 1997 election. Stephen Harper, he's never been forgiven down there for pointing out Atlantic Canada's reliance on EI as part of the reason for what he called a culture of defeat in the region. He hasn't been forgiven, even though he said that long before he was Prime Minister, even though he has long since apologized. See, one of the things we can't talk about in this country, because it's too touchy for some people, is that Atlantic Canada is hooked on EI. It's no longer an employment insurance system. It is welfare from the rest of the country to the poorest part of Canada. Let's be frank about this. I started to think about it again after both Liberal leader Justin Trudeau and NDP leader Tom Mulcair promised to make EI easier to get. And do you know what struck me about this? Well, they didn't make their respective announcements in Vancouver or Toronto or Montreal. No, they both made their announcements in New Brunswick.
NDP government will restore fairness to EI. We're going to protect EI premiums so that they pay for EI benefits and they aren't treated as the government's piggy bank. Your EI premium shouldn't pay for Stephen Harper and Justin Trudeau's corporate tax cuts.
But more than just fixing Stephen Harper's mess, here's what a Liberal government will do. First, we will reduce the waiting period for employment insurance benefits to 1 week from 2.
New Brunswick. Why would they do that? Maybe because it's part of Atlantic Canada. Maybe because they've got a lot of people on pogey down there. You know, if a politician said, oh, they love pogey down east, they'd be pilloried. Their careers would be over in the region. But if you go to that region and say, we'll make pogey easier for you to get, well, you're going to be cheered, just as they both were. Now, I started going through the data. It's not a pretty picture that I'm seeing. Not pretty at all. Did you know that Atlantic Canada accounts for just 6.6% of Canada's total population? But as of July 2015, they were 18% of all EI recipients. In their winter months, it goes higher. It was 19.3% last January. That's 3 times their population. In July, there were 1.1 million people working full or part-time in Newfoundland, PEI, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick combined. But at the same time, in those 4 provinces, there were 99,050 people collecting EI. That's equal to just under 10% of the workforce. Now, this is higher than the rest of the country, where EI is harder to get and where people that take seasonal jobs in the summer, they're mostly expected to find other work in the winter and vice versa, but not down east. You have a summer job? Don't worry, we'll take care of you in the winter. Politicians have long figured out that promising people in Atlantic Canada that they'll make the easy money flow, well, that's a sure way to votes, which is sad. Now, I know there are plenty of people from Atlantic Canada and in Atlantic Canada, but we know about the ones spread across the country, working in all sorts of jobs. Some very hard-working people, and I know about the planes, particularly from Newfoundland, that have carried workers to the oil sands and back for years. I know there's lots of hard-working people in the area and from the area, but there is still a problem. Atlantic Canada has lower wages, lower employment, lower economic growth, and the answer to fixing this, to improving their economy, is not to keep shoveling more pogey at the people, the way Mulcair and Trudeau are both promising. Like I said, the whole region is 6.6% of Canada's population, but 18% of pogey claims. Ontario has 38% of the population, just 28% of claims. In Alberta, which was already hit with rising unemployment in July, well, they've got 11% of the population, but even with mass layoffs, they were only hitting 9.6% of claims. Something's got to be done about this skewed system. In addition to the EI system, essentially federal welfare for the region, 3 out of the 4 provinces, Newfoundland being the exception, well, they also get billions in federal equalization. And then there's the funds from the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, another slush fund. Mulcair and Trudeau, well, they're promising to do away with sensible EI reforms such as requiring people to look for work that might be a little further away, up to an hour. Lots of people commute that far to work across the rest of the country. You might have to take a slightly lower wage than what you wanted, or your EI could be cut off. But they oppose these sorts of reforms. Look, EI is supposed to be employment insurance. It's supposed to be about helping you bridge from one job to the next. It's not supposed to be a hammock for you to lie in until you get exactly what you want, or to help you wait the winter out each and every year. What politicians should be doing is telling the truth. If there's no work where you live, you may have to move. If there's no work, look, we can't support you forever. We have jobs across Canada that can't be filled, even now. We bring in hundreds of thousands of new immigrants each year to take many of those jobs or create new ones, and yet we've got whole regions of the country, the Atlantic region being just the biggest, where we pay people to sit idle. It makes no sense, and it's time we stopped it.